section, and unfortunately I didn't bring my book with me, but being a little bit of a geek and loving science, having gone to medical school for a short term and having been in the military, I really have an affinity for the sciences overall, not just the biological ones. So I took a topic that's completely foreign to me, and I researched it, much like you did with the lottery last week, and thought, how does this apply? Because every day we're surrounded by these new technologies, and it seems like things are coming out faster and faster, and we're going, where do they get these ideas? Where does it come from? Well, let me start with a question. What does, hold on, sorry, here just a second. Okay, I'm actually starting now.
Oh.
You like that? I had to make sure everything was functioning first. What does a microwave have in common with a Teflon pan? Anybody know? Anybody want to gander a guess?
They wear out.
They both wear out.
Going on here.
All right, then let me pose a second one. What does the GPS systems in our cars have to do with human rights in Botswana? Botswana, sorry.
They know where we're at.
Yeah. We know where the trouble is, right?
Yes.
Both of those examples that I gave you have their roots in what's called theory. In other words, someone a long time ago had an idea. They didn't necessarily know how to apply, but the idea was the foundation for something that would later become applied. So to answer the second one of those, because I found this much more interesting, I'm actually going to refer to my slideshow here because I do have the answer to it in here. So what I decided to do in reading my geek magazine, Popular Science, edition, there was an article in here amongst a bunch of articles about data, and it had to do with networks. And it starts with the most incredible title. And I'm sitting there going, well, why wouldn't I want to read this? Yeah. So what I'm going to do, though, before I jump into that, is I'm going to give you a little bit of background on what I'm talking about as far as the science of networks. Now, we are surrounded every single day by networks. We get on them to use our phones and to use our computers. We engage in them in a social environment in order to make business connections or improve our lifestyles. Everything has a network these days. So, let me just make sure this thing's working correctly here. I apologize. Okay. So as I was reading through my magazine, this was the title. This man could rule the world. And next to it is a picture of the man that could rule the world. Being curious, I wanted to know who was going to be the next emperor of our world. This man right here. His last name is Barbassi, and he's an Italian theorist who works in network science. Now, how does that touch our everyday lives? I'm going to explain. But just know that this man very well could rule your world. Now, network theory has its origins back in the 1700s. There was a gentleman named Leonard Euler, and he lived in Prussia at the time. Now, at that time, he was a mathematician and involved in some other things. And there was this question, because Prussia is surrounded by a river, and there's 7 bridges that connect into it and out of it. And so one day, he was having a conversation with someone, and the question was posed, would it be possible to cross over every single bridge without going over the same bridge twice? Much like those puzzles we play, when we're kids, can you do this, can you trace this in one without ever looking at the pen? Well, he did it. And what he did is he stripped out all the street names, stripped out all of the personal attributes of that city, and broke it down to what are called hubs and spokes, much like a wheel on a car. And he said, let me see if there's a way to do this. Well, what he did right there in that instance, just trying to answer an innocent question, just trying to keep his mind working, is he developed the first network, and he mapped it. Out of that, several theorists came later, and they were able to improve on it, expound on it, and then they could give it real-life application. Now, I mentioned to you that networks are everywhere. They're all around us. Now, network science is the study of engineered networks, information networks, biological, cognitive, semantic, and social. Okay. All scientific jargon aside, how does that mean anything to me? Well, here we go. We're in a society that's connected with networks, right? We have our business networks. We have our social networks. Some of us spend most of our time here. Yeah, and if you're not careful, that's exactly what's going to happen to your network. And then you have the World Wide Web. And then you have the world overall in many different facets and forms, businesses, different communities. So these networks are active in our everyday lives. They are very much a part of who we are and how we function. Well, what if these networks can make your life a little easier? What if these same networks, which at times seem chaotic, actually had a meaning to them? And what if your Facebook could unlock the cure for cancer?
Cool.
Now, some of you guys are looking at me a little funny right now. How in the world did this ever happen? Okay. So, you have Mr. Barbassi, who is the foremost authority right now in network theory. What he developed is he developed a very large algorithm which could take massive amounts of data, break it down, and find predictable behavior. Because after all, if you can predict the behavior, then what can you do down the road? You can control it, right? So for example, most of us have computers, right?
Yes.
How many of you have antivirus on your computers? Okay. Do you think those software engineers wait until a new virus comes out and then they fix it? No, they use what's called predictive behavior. So they look at the ebb and the flow of the information of the internet, they look at what's going on, and they predict how those things are going to change, and then they try to get out in front of it by creating new protections so that when they come along, it may or may not work. Now, what Mr. Barbassi did, it was strictly theory. In the world of theorists, there are theorists which come up with the idea, and then you have applied theorists. They're the boots on the ground, let's take this abstract theory and let's make it work in everyday life. So for example, most of you own a cell phone, right? Pretty much everybody in the room?
Yes.
Yeah, that came from about a 400-year-old idea. So what they do when they analyze networks, whether it's a social network, whether it's a bunch of phone bills, whether it's buying habits, they break it down to what are called hubs and spokes. And they find what's in common with these. As you see in between here now, I'll get to this in just a minute as to why this is labeled the way it is, but these little lines in between, these are your spokes, and these large dots, these are your hubs. So in other words, your hubs have some sort of influence in the network overall. They're called control hubs. And then you have these spokes which shoot out, and they may make a connection with another hub, or it may connect to something minor, or it may be second, 3 times removed. The point is that they're able to take what looks like chaos and create predictable behavior and analyze it so that it actually turns out a result. How many of you on your Facebook have noticed the ads above and below on the sides and how they change? How many of you ever gone to a Staples website and all of a sudden you go back on your Facebook and there's Staples ads, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not computer software.
It's Big Brother.
Yeah, I'll get to that when we talk about applied theorists. So what are the implications of this kind of analysis? Well, they can predict where you're going to be with 93% accuracy, not knowing who you are. They can target market you. They can use these models to determine how diseases would spread if there's an epidemic. You can go through medical causes and cures. They can find the cures for things based on how it relates to a previous sickness or illness and what it had in common. Traffic patterns, we love that one because we love when we can get through town faster. And we can teach systems how to respond to unknown variables. This is the one right here. You mentioned it, Big Brother. 1984, everybody's favorite book. This is very real. You know, a lot of predictive behavior is control. It's to be able to determine the outcome before it even happens. Now, we all know Einstein, right? Brilliant theorist. We all know his theory of relativity, correct? Now, how does that apply to your everyday life? Most of us couldn't answer the question. I couldn't answer the question. How it applied to everyday life is it covered everything from a nuclear bomb all the way through. He challenged the notions of absolutes in the physical world, the moral world, and the intellectual world. Everyday technological dependencies were created because of his theories, and I won't go into all of that, but there's a lot. And he was able to influence an entire social and national policy, both on education, warfare, and human rights, simply because this man had a thought. So the next time you pick up your GPS, remember the thought that went into it. This time I'd love to give it back to you.
Very interesting. I wonder how we can connect Halloween, ghosts, goblins.
Is Bob Freel. This is one of Bob.
Aaron had asked me to give him a little bit more of an advanced evaluation, so if I seem harsh in some ways, he asked for it.
Waiver at the door, people. Waiver at the door.
Oh, yes. Thinking about what's going to happen on the 14th, some of these items actually came to mind when I was looking at your speech. First of all, you didn't have an introduction. Second of all, I did not think that your premise was really clear. And third of all, We did need a printed copy, but in the future, please remember your book. So, okay, what were the positives in his speech today? Aaron's got one of those voices that are very soft, very smooth, and easy to listen to. You know, you listen to the easy channel radios, and that's kind of Aaron's voice when you listen to him. As far as things that he can improve on, I've got quite a few here. I'm going to talk about a few of them. When you did your opening, I felt your opening rambled an awful lot. You said, one of the lines you said was, let me start with a question. Don't set up your question, just ask the question. But I even think a better opening for this particular speech would have been, this man could rule the world, and show his opinion. And then you can go into some of the other stories, etc. Now you've created, remember, you've only got 30 seconds or less to grab a hold of your audience. That would have grabbed the audience better than him telling about what he could and he couldn't do, didn't know, didn't do, nobody cares. I liked how and sometimes you blacked out the screen, which made it a lot easier for you to be able to communicate and focus on you. Remember, you're the presentation, not the screen here. There were a couple of slides I thought you could have done a better job on. You had one that had a bunch of definitions. You could have just taken the definitions, pulled them out, and then bullet pointed them or put them in a list with single words, boom, boom, boom. Slides with a lot of wording is very difficult for people to look at. Then you had the slide that had everything going in every which direction. I couldn't tell from back there because I'm going blind. You could have shown that slide first, and then when you're giving us an explanation, have a second slide with 2 or 3 examples that you pulled out of it to give us an idea what that network was all about. I felt that you really didn't tell us what you wanted us to do, think, or feel. Because I honestly don't remember what your close was. So what is it that you wanted me to do with what you were saying? Remember, the reason that you have to have a premise for a speech, and when you're going to do this for the black belt, you will be required to have an introduction, a premise, and a printed copy of the speech. Because it's extremely important. If you cannot define what your speech is in 10 words or less, then you don't really understand what your topic is. So, there's a lot of good to what you did. I've got all the information here, but there's an awful lot of area for improvement too.
Our third evaluator is Rachel.